Hello everyone, welcome to That Heathen Bastard. That Heathen Bastard. Remember that this is not a news show, this is a platform for political talking points and discussion. This is meant to start a conversation and get some ideas out there from an admittedly ordinary perspective. From a more or less working class dude who is a moderate conservative who holds to some left-wing ideas. Now, today I wanted to talk to you about... This is something a little more personal than what I often discuss, but this is what I hate about living in the Pacific Northwest. Just some of my personal gripes. But they do have some interesting points to talk about that should be worth considering. Now, what I really hate about living in the Pacific Northwest, I first needed to contrast that with what I love about it. And generally speaking, the culture of the PNW is very outdoorsy. A lot of hiking and, foraging for berries and mushrooms. But at the same time, people liking to have their technology. Living in a rural neighborhood in a small city is very nice. You get nature and technology, you get best of both worlds. But at the same time, the culture of the PNW is very, I guess it has kind of a libertarian attitude to it. Right? Like, weird religious cults and smoking weed and believing in Sasquatch are cliches about the place for a reason. It may not have necessarily been impacted by hippiedom, but I think the hippie movement would have been pretty welcome here back in the day. So it's pretty outdoorsy, almost pseudo-spiritual, very individual freedom-oriented. It's a very special place. You'd have to live in it to fully appreciate it, for at least 5 to 10 years to really understand it. It's a weird and wonderful place, which is why I'm sad and almost driven insane by the government in the Pacific Northwest, in general, the way they tend to run things. In particular, I wanted to address this tendency in the Pacific Northwest to vilify political incorrectness and to say that, you can't tell people who are addicted to things that they're broken and they need help. That's the wrong message. Forget your AA and your 12-step. We're going to defund your fucking, your rehab because that's politically incorrect. No, we're going to send them free money until they get clean. And as long as they're hooked, we'll just keep sending them free money. Good fucking God. Unbelievable. And worse than that still is how the government in the Pacific Northwest continually turns a blind eye to the riots in Seattle and Portland and the general chaos from the far left. Do you know how long that fucking Chaz in Seattle was set up? And how long it took them to actually get in there and just take care of it? All they had to do was turn off their water and power and then march in. And they could have had the place cleaned out in less than a day. But they waited for what felt like several months. Though it probably only been maybe like 2 weeks. But it felt very, very long. And very, very drawn out. I do not live in Seattle. Thank the gods I do not live in Seattle. I live in a small city in between Seattle and Portland. It's a much nicer place. But it has its own share of troubles and its own personal hell deep within if you know what to look for. Suffice to say, the government here sucks. They turn a blind eye to ideological violence that's in their favor. They insist on insane political correctness. And worst of all, the governor here in Washington State is a full-on climate activist, which means he's going to put his activism ahead of doing his job as fucking governor. Which, in of itself, is just absolutely insane. That would do that. Once you are the fucking governor, that is your goddamn fucking job, and that is what you fucking do. That is what comes first. Nothing before governorship. Okay? None of your stupid activism, none of your silly ideas. You are the fucking governor. Do your goddamn job, Jay Inslee. I fucking hate you. I'm swearing a lot today. Can you see I'm upset? I hate to think about this, the fucking Democrats in the Pacific Northwest. I really just... I despise them, I really do. And if it comes election season and they're not currently in office and they're trying to get elected again, primary their asses. Primary them all. We'd be better off without them. We'd be better with the Republicans being the majority in charge here in the Pacific Northwest. We'd be so much better off. It's insane. The Republicans really do wonderful things at the local level. At the government or state level, it's more mixed. And if they're over there in Washington, D.C., they're mostly useless. The Republican Party is full to the brim with Mitch McConnell's. But at the local level, there's plenty of Ron DeSantis's to go around. And I've heard talk of, by the way, of Ted Cruz running for something bigger, like possibly SCOTUS or even POTUS. And honestly, I'd be in favor of that. I used to think Ted Cruz might have been kind of meekish, but I was wrong. Turns out he's a bit more of a lion than a lamb. I mistook his silence for weakness. Classic mistake. When he decides to get up there and be loud, oh boy, is he. He's got a spine. Boy, if we had guys like him here or Ron DeSantis, the PNW would be great. Make America Florida. But just some of the realities of life in the PNW, some of which is a result of Democratic governance, some of it not. I remember walking to the corner store recently with two of my teenage nephews, and we were just chatting it up and looking down, and well, we saw a nice little orange syringe, and I'm pretty sure you know what that was used for. This unfortunately is a place where people like to go because there's little alleyways and corners of the city where they can hide and shoot themselves up full of God knows what. There really isn't much of a rehab culture in Washington, at least not a strong one. And I don't know if there's any sort of rehab culture in Portland. I know probably rehab culture isn't even a real term, but if I use it, you get what I mean. I think there's probably better rehab down in, like, California. I know that's where the heavy metal star Dave Mustaine managed to get clean with sort of a hybrid system that involved karate and, I think, religious discipline. But that's just one of the realities of life around here. Methamphetamines, other hard drugs, the fact that the homeless are sometimes harassed. If you give money to the homeless, just straight out of pocket, there's a good chance they might get harassed by a crackhead. A crackhead or a meth head comes out of the dark shadows and assaults the homeless and steals the money they just got through charity. And then they go and they waste that money on drugs. I know that a close friend of mine had to grab his girlfriend and just bolt. He was fine. It was his girlfriend that was in danger. Just had to grab her and go someplace in the state where it's a little safer. You know, a little safer in the Pacific Northwest where things get a little nuts, you know. This shit happens. And what's added to the realities in life around here now is we're seeing more and more political division. We've got crazy neighbors sometimes screaming at each other. We've got, like, the whole atmosphere of even just my hometown has completely changed. This is not the city I remember from years ago. The whole place has a different attitude to it. It was never like a tight-knit community or anything, but it was a nice place, relatively speaking. Like, you knew that shit was going on, but you could usually live a day in your life without having to worry about it so much. But now, like, half the time it's just, like, up in your face because of the insane political division that currently exists. And you just can't ignore it anymore and have your nice little life. That's partly the Democrats' fault. That's partly the extremists' fault. And we have small cities like mine who communicate. The community partially communicates through messages on bathroom stalls. And the messages went from innocent jokes to recently seeing more and more messages of, like, Boogaloo Boys and other shit. The whole atmosphere is changing, and not for the better. And I'm sure many other people living in the area have similar stories to that. Now, I also wanted to talk about Seattle, right? Another reality of living in the PNW is that Seattle is becoming just like a giant drug den, where you can go and see a grown-ass man taking a shit in the streets and not getting caught, or just homeless encampments near hospitals, just giant row after row of fucking RVs. Not as nice as the one I live in, although there's certainly nicer ones. And just other shit. Seattle's being propped up by taxpayer money, but the sickness within the city just grows and grows. And there's really not much to do about it. The high homelessness, the high addiction rate. The city has a nice veneer, but underneath the veil is just... there's a heart of sickness to the whole place. And I refuse to visit Seattle unless I have a damn good reason to go. And that is largely because of Democratic governance, not just because of the sort of insane extremism that is going on right now. And then, of course, there's Olympia. Olympia is a little nicer than Seattle, generally. You don't see as much homelessness. It's a little bit nicer. It's more upper class. And it's a well-known fact that has been going on even since I was a kid that always pissed me off about Olympians, was they have this high hoity-toity, "Oh, I am superior to you, plebeian." Human society has always had that sort of thing going on, but it never fails to just piss me the fuck off. Honestly, if I had to live in a big city, I would rather live in Olympia than Seattle. I would. Olympia is a lot nicer, from what I've seen. At the very least, if there is like the same kind of heart of sickness to Olympia, it's certainly not as visible. So life there would be a little easier. Plus, I never heard of a fucking an autonomous zone being set up in Olympia. Although I wouldn't put it past them to try. It's a pretty high security city. So if you actually were the victim of a crime, there's a good chance you would probably get some justice for yourself. So Olympia is pretty nice. It's just that the people there are so fucking snobby. And the Democrats get to sit in their nice little homes thinking, oh, we're doing such a good job of governing. Like, no, you're fucking not. If you lived more with more like us and the little people, and saw the shit that we witness almost every other day, just the little things that come up to remind us how awful it can be sometimes, you'd be changing your fucking tune in a heartbeat. You're blissfully ignorant. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Olympians are better than I think, but I've seen that time and time again. This ignorant, elitist attitude that they don't understand what it's like to live in a small city and see tiny reminders of sort of the underbelly. Maybe you decide to go for a walk bumming around downtown and you go into a little small area off the beaten path just out of boredom and see like just a random tent in the middle of of a clearing. Or seeing a homeless person acting suspicious of you while they're trying to set up a tent in the middle of a park, in the middle of the woods. The drugs, the crime, the insanity, that would be much better kept in check if a right-wing approach to governance would be permitted here. And I have not been to Portland, but I know people who have. I have their stories, and I can verify it to some extent. Sort of the nature of Portland, how the whole place has sort of this bizarre atmosphere. It's a very strange place. And it's only gotten stranger since the current divide and extremism, with 15 one-way streets in a row, followed by sort of the chaos of some of the bizarre shops and sort of the bizarre culture, which might have exacerbated the divide somewhat, because a lot of the far left extremists and the far right extremists do seem to occupy an occult-like mindset, and they are at a definite slant with the worldview of the common working man, where their interpretation of the facts is just a little bit weirder and a little bit blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's an official term now. It's a little bit blah, blah, blah. But yeah, Portland is a weird fucking place. And a lot of the chaos going on right now was kind of bred there and migrated north to Seattle. Because Seattle's got a couple of major universities. And I know it's a conspiracy theory, blah, 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 but the neo-Marxist extremism is traceable to the universities. That's where it was created. That's why it was bred in Portland, and why it was further cultivated in Seattle. Further cultured like a bacteria. It's a bacterial disease that infects your brain and turns you into a lunatic that thinks Nazis were fascists instead of socialists, which they were socialist, since the term Third Reich means a third way in between Marxism and capitalism, since Hitler thought that those were Jewish conspiracy theories to take over the world. So the Third Reich is a version of socialism that uses something other than Marxist theory. But don't say that to the extremists. They have their own version of reality, where it was Mussolini's fascism all around, in both Japan and Germany, when in reality, not really. So yeah, that's just some of the realities. And then, of course, there's the relationship between Washington and Oregon, which is kind of toxic. Oregon frequently makes things like toll road schemes and try to force it on us up north of them. They do a number of things that they try to, pardon my use of a vulgarity, rape us up the butt on a number of issues. The relationship is not healthy. It could be healthier, but I suppose it's not so toxic that it's irredeemable. Suffice to say, it's weird to me because the culture of Washington and Oregon, in many ways, are very similar. Oregon is sort of like our weird, slightly bizarre, off-brand sibling. Right? We wear a lot of the same clothing styles, we like a lot of the same things, same music, same culture. I mean, Portlandia, the opening theme was literally the dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. The grunge, the fucking, flannel shirts, all that shit. Oregon is like our slightly weird off-brand cousin or sibling. And I feel like it would be a nicer place if just their democratic governance took a different approach. If their approach to Washington was healthier and not as toxic, and that things weren't so chaotic. Bottom line is, if we had Republicans in charge over here, a lot of our problems would diminish greatly, some of them possibly disappearing altogether. One could only hope. The Democrats only serve to exacerbate these problems with their politically correct approach and turning a blind eye to fucking extremism. So I condemn the Democrats fully and completely for turning a blind eye to extremism just because it's useful to them, and taking the wrong approach to getting people clean, and continuing to expand the ever-increasing inflation in D.C., causing the dollar to lose less and less, to lose more and more value, to the point where I made myself sad a few days ago because my mother was watching old ads, and it like black and white commercials, and it just made me realize I've never known a life without inflation. Like, ever. And thinking about that made myself sad. Because capitalism is a system that grows GDP like no other. And the increasing value of the dollar just lifts people up out of poverty by giving them access to an insanely powerful currency. We have it so much nicer here than many other parts of the world, it's insane. But this constant inflation, the Democrats just want to ruin that. They want to continue to cause inflation to just go up and up and up and up. And you know what's funny? I might support something like UBI, but only if there was a plan in place to manage the inevitable inflation. And you know what? Unless you got a plan to manage the resulting inflation, I don't want to hear another word. Just shut up. I don't want to hear talk about UBI. I don't want to hear talk about expanding welfare. Unless there is a plan in place to manage the inflation. To increase the value of the dollar so that spending this much money will be less necessary and people's lives will be fucking easier. But no, the Democrats are some of the biggest, fattest Keynesian socialists this side of, well, anywhere. They're fucking idiots. And I'll bet you anything, half of them don't even know the first thing about basic fucking economics. They're trash. They're a trash party. And if you actually look into the history of the Democrats, they are more easily associated with racism and hatred and anything than the Republicans could ever hope to be. The Republicans literally formed on the platform of ending slavery while keeping the Union together, leading to this absurd, because the Democrats can't deal with the reality of their own history, so they create this absurdist myth, this legend known as party switch, where like the racist party switched hands. So you ask them questions like, oh, well, when did that happen? When specifically did that occur? And they're like, I don't know. And who switched to where? I don't know. They can't answer. Democrats are the party of disguised racism, insane socialist policies, and unending inflation, and not getting people off drugs and getting them clean. That is what you vote for when you vote a Democrat. I will never vote for a Democrat ever again. In the past I had. I always voted sort of in the middle. I voted purple. Now I just vote solid red. These people are trash. I will never vote a Democrat again. Anyway, that's what I have to say about that. You can disagree with me if you want to. Bitch, I'm right. I'm totally right. Anyway, with that being said, there will be a link down below in the description to my books. Please buy, download, read them, and as always, choose peace.